Welcome. I'm Marvin DeGier, the Senior Vice President of Talent Development for the Greater Des Moines Partnership. Thank you for joining us today. The partnership in collaboration with Capital Crossroads and the Young Professional Connection welcome you to today's conversation about justice reform. For the attendees online, we ask you to place questions in the chat feature to be moderated at the end if we have time. For attendees in person, we ask you to continue wearing your mask unless seated to eat or drink, and to hold your questions to the end to be moderated if time allows. We would like to take a moment to remind everyone of the importance of civility in today's event. The partnership continues to support the Drake University's Race Center's Show Some Respect campaign. At the partnership, we urge all Iowans to be courteous as they express their opinions about issues. Together, we can have the tough conversations in a respectful way and find common ground solutions. As an organization, the goal is to educate a broad audience on policy topics so more people understand the issue and can advocate to our elected officials. For 2021, we have scheduled 6 public policy issue forums that have taken place every other month on the 3rd Tuesday at noon. We've already covered the topics of childcare, broadband, community placemaking, and affordable housing. If you would like to watch one of the previous issue forums, please let Ryan know and he can send you the recording of the event. Our final forum will cover inclusive economic development on Tuesday, December 14th. Each year, the Partnership Government Policy Council develops a state policy agenda that the policy team will use to advocate on during the state legislative session. The important topic of justice reform remains a top priority for the partnership. The partnership supports the recommendations of the Governor's Focus Committee on Criminal Justice Reform and further efforts to create an equitable environment for all Iowans. I'm now going to turn it over to our experts to better dive into the issue by introducing our moderator today, Kameron Middlebrooks. Cameron Middlebrooks is currently the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines Director of Community Impact. In this role, he oversees grant-making programs and represents the foundation in various community conversations. Cameron works alongside Community Foundation colleagues and community partners to lead the social Capital Crossroads, in which the 4 Equity tool was developed. This tool, a link to which we will put in the chat, is being used locally, regionally, and even nationally. Cameron has previously worked for the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Evelyn K. Davis Center for Working Families, and also with the Directors Council, where he primarily supported the development of minority small businesses and nonprofits. He is also the former regional director of the NAACP, where he has also served in volunteer roles as a member of the National Board of Directors and the Des Moines branch president. Cameron has also served on the Des Moines Civil and Human Rights Commission, where as the chair, he helped to champion the Bridging the Gap initiative that brought forth equitable policy change for the city of Des Moines. Cameron, the floor is yours.
Thank you, good sir. Man, that was a very nice introduction. It's almost like I wrote it, and I appreciate that. The check will be in the mail. Welcome to everybody. Thank you all for allowing me to moderate this today. Thank you all for those that are here in person, and for the millions, or at least the 13 online. We appreciate your presence as well. I'm going to get real quick into the introductions because I really want to hear from this table of experts that we have today. The first sitting to my left, your right, is Jerry Evans, who is the Executive Director of the 5th Judicial District Department of Correctional Services. In this role, Jerry's in the 5th District. He covers 17 counties, extending from Polk, Dallas, and Warren, all the way down to the Iowa border. On average, the district supervises approximately 8,500 clients under their supervision. This includes probation, parole, and work release, and pretrial release. The 5th CBC is the largest judicial district in Iowa in terms of population served. Jerry has been in the field of corrections, both at the federal and judicial district level, for over 34 years. Jerry received his undergraduate degree from the University of Northern Iowa and his master's degree from Drake University. And Jerry, I will not hold those 2 universities against you. Next, we have my friend Dennis Henderson, who is the Teach Tech coordinator for Broadlawns Medical Center. Dennis truly lives a life story from prison to promise. From struggling with addiction and going to prison at age 25 and not being released until age 50. Dennis would eventually get an opportunity to serve as an intern lobbying at the Iowa State House, where he worked on legislation that helped juveniles sentenced to life without the possibility of parole get a sentence of life with the possibility of parole. He is proud to say he had a small part in several young people getting second chances. Dennis now serves as the Teach Tech Coordinator for Broadlawns Medical Center and is blessed to help over 100 people with barriers get employment at Broadlawns. He has sat on several advisory committees and boards and been involved in many partnerships. He volunteers and advocates for disparaged communities as well as people. He is living the promise, and that is why he is a proponent advocate for second chances in criminal reform. Welcome, Dennis. And finally, we have Amber Ramirez. Amber is the director for Central Iowa Works at the United Way of Central Iowa. There, Amber is the intermediary that works with employers to fill open positions and improve career ladders, and works with individuals in the community that are interested in filling these positions, and starting with the career paths. Amber has worked in the workforce development field for the past 10 years, working to increase economic opportunities in our community. She leads the Opportunity Reentry Task Force, along with Mary Kelly from Project Iowa, and she also sits on the Greater Des Moines Partnerships Inclusion Council and Iowa Literacy Council Board. Welcome, Amber. So I do have a set of preset questions that we will be going through. And then again, at the end, we'll hopefully get to questions from the audience. There's also questions from online. But at this time, I would like to give the panelists each just an opportunity for some brief introductions and brief comments. And we'll start with you, Jerry.
All right. Thank you. You know, one of the things that is often talked about in the media, and obviously we're here today for the same reason, is just the whole topic of criminal justice reform. And from my perspective, I look at reform or reforming as being synonymous with the term evolve or evolving. As we get better at collecting data and being able to analyze the data, we should always be looking at what that data is telling us. What do our outcomes tell us about how we're doing in terms of meeting the goals of our mission and vision? Reform or evolving should always be a process of continuous quality improving. As an example, we are in the midst of working with a consultant on how to repurpose our men's residential program out at Fort Des Moines. For those of you unfamiliar with the Fort Des Moines Men's Residential Facility, it's located on the south side of Des Moines. And the buildings we occupy are a part of the historical heritage of African-American soldiers who served in World War II. We have capacity for 240 residents and serve over 1,000 residents every year through our program there. We recognize that the 40-year-old model for residential corrections needed to be scrutinized and evolve from where it's been the last 40 years. Because of our ability to provide the consultant with years of data, demographics, and outcomes, we are in a position to make informed decisions on how best to transform toward a model that better prepares our residents for success in their lives, not just while they're under our supervision, but in the long term. In short, we should always be looking to evolve as new information becomes available. So whether we use the term reform or evolve, I look at it from the perspective of always tracking outcomes and following data and making improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Dennis.
I appreciate you guys allowing me to come today and talk from ex-offenders' perspective. 3 concerns that I have, and they are removing barriers. Removing barriers consist of in the job market, in the housing market, in transportation. A lot of times I believe we go with our norms, and now we got to start thinking outside the box. With our employment being what it is today and the need for having skilled workers and workers in general, it's important that we make sure that when people return to the community, that they have a clear path to success. We can't continue to build in barriers between the offender and his road to success, because it's not going to happen if they don't have good job opportunities available to them, It's not gonna happen if they don't have places to live and we continue to throw them back into their old haunts. It's not gonna happen if they don't have transportation. So it's important that we start looking outside the box. One of the things that I think about a lot is the protected class. If we gave ex-offenders a protected class status, that could remove all that with one breaststroke, you know, but I don't think that is too popular. So one of the things that we have to think about doing is incentivizing and disincentivizing, making housing, transportation, and jobs, put barriers before those. So if we can do that, and I think we tried it in the past quite often, but I think that what we need to do is be more proactive about that and try to find out a kind of balance for that. And another thing that I think about when I think about removing barriers is license. There's 24 crimes that you could commit that has nothing to do with driving that can get your driver's license taken. And I think the data will show that people who are able to drive when they get out are going to be more successful. You have more opportunities to go to different jobs. The bus route, I rode a bike from Fort Des Moines to Ankeny to get to my job, you know, and riding a bike in Iowa is not going to be a year-round thing. You're just not going to be able to do it. So, you know, although I was motivated to be successful, I also look at it realistically now that, you know, riding that bike or trying to get people to take public transportation, that is going to really limit the amount of jobs that they're going to be able to get. Another thing that I want to dwell on is accountability. A lot of times we come up with a lot of good ideas, but, you know, when the fire's hot, you know, we run with it. But when it gets cold, they seem to just fade away through attrition. We have to have a way to make folks accountable for some of these agreements that they buy into, you know, some of the policies that they buy into, because we don't have a lot of consistency there when it comes to longevity. We get the programs, we push it for a little while, and then when the media goes away, that situation goes away. And another thing, I think we ought to change the narratives on how we market, you know, ex-offender or untapped talent. It's important that we let people know or businesses know that they have a commercial interest in hiring ex-offenders. You know, they are your captive audience. You know, your millennials now and your extra Gen Xers or whatever you call them, you know, they're not in the marketplace as long. They're gonna have 5 careers in their lifetime. You know, they're not like us, baby boomers. I must talk about myself. Baby boomers, we were loyal to one company. We went to a company and we expected to stay in that company 30 years and get to go watch. The millennials are not going to be there to get to go watch, you know, so they're going to be changing positions a lot. So we ought to be really thinking about how do we let companies know that it's commercially advantageous for them to get ex-offenders to participate in their workforce, because they are, because of the rules and regulations attached to them, they are going to stay at that job for a long period of time. Because they have a vested interest. They know that the opportunities are not going to come around. Their pivot time is not that fast. So if they lose a job, it's a whole lot, takes a whole lot longer for them to get another job. So that is the audience that we need to address. And I think that that's the way to do
Thank you, Dennis. Cameron, please.
So I'll just add a little bit to what Dennis said. I think it's really important for employers to be thinking about this at this time. With the job market how it is, we need to be utilizing all the skills that are out there. 1 in 3 Americans right now have a criminal history. So if we keep these policies that we have of screening people out, you know, the 7 years, 5 years, even 3 years, you're blocking out a huge group of people without ever considering them. So I think we really have to look into the screening and make our policies make sense. Why did we put these policies in place? A lot of these policies are really old. And if we look back in the 70s, people who were incarcerated for different reasons. We've gotten tougher on crime, which means that society isn't worse off than it was. People aren't committing worse crimes than before. Just more people are getting in trouble than before, and more people have criminal histories than before. So if we keep blocking people out these 7, 5, even 3 years, we aren't setting people up for success, as Dennis said. And from a company standpoint, we're not getting the skills that we need.
Perfect, Amber. I appreciate those comments, because you guys just really walked us into the first question. And this is going to be directed towards you, Amber. You talk about the importance of employers leaning into this space, right? I think right now a lot of employers are getting forced to lean into this space, may not know exactly how to do it in a proper way. So if I were a business and wanted to expand my talent, my pool of talent to include returning citizens, where should I be starting?
I think the first thing that businesses need to do is really look at their internal policies. And this is going to be different depending on the company, because some companies have local decision-making power right here, and their HR can look at an individual and make a decision based on that individual. A lot of our larger companies have some sort of matrix that's being used to decide whether or not people can be considered for this position. And from what I've heard, it's kind of like this black box. So we get an applicant, they go through a background check, it gets sent away, and then it comes back to the HR person whether or not that person can be considered. And a lot of these matrices are really based on the bad things that people have done and aren't taking into account the other side, the good things. What are the classes that people have gone to? What treatment have they been through? Do they have community support? There's all these other things that should be considered into these matrices that aren't currently being in there. And then also for HR to really understand what is being considered. What are you looking at? Where in the process are you asking? Are you asking on the application? Because then you have people screening themselves out right at that point. They won't even apply because they don't think they have a chance. Are you doing a background check? What are you doing with the background check? Who sees it? Is it just the HR? Are the supervisors seeing that as well? Who's making the judgment call? Do they understand how to read a background check? Because many background checks will show things that people were accused of, even if they weren't ultimately charged with that crime. There's just so many things that are out there. So it's really understanding what your background check process includes, and then figuring out where can you change this? What are you considering? And are you blocking out whole areas of crime? I hear from a lot of employers, oh, we blocked out all violent crime. All right, well, it's not a great way to do it. You really should hear what that particular individual's stories are, because there are plenty of people who have been charged with violent crime that haven't laid a finger on anyone. I mean, there's so many things. So it's really important. I'm not saying that you should be for or against any sort of crime or that you don't want the punishments. However, each individual is different, and we need to have the capacity to take into account what actually happened in this person's case and what have they been doing to improve their own situation. And then the other thing I would say is there are plenty of support in this community. Whether you reach out to a place like Central Iowa Works, the Davis Center, Iowa Workforce Development, Project Iowa, I can go on and on. There's so many community organizations out there that are willing to help and to provide support for individuals that you are looking into hiring. So that would be where I think I would start.
Jerry, this next question is going to be directed at you first, but if others would like to join in, please do. I saw a stat, just looking it up today. And Iowa's recidivism rate over the past 3 years is over 38%. For those who don't know what recidivism is, it's folks who have been released from prison that actually return to prison within a certain amount of years, a certain amount of time. Dennis kind of alluded to the importance of employment, right, for success of individuals and not returning. From a Department of Corrections standpoint, can you talk to me about why employment is necessary for a returning citizen in order not to get back into the system?
Yes, thank you. So from my perspective, there's just a lot of externalities that are tied to being gainfully employed. And I want to emphasize the term being gainfully employed. what I know from working with clients for over 34 years is those that find gainful employment with a sustainable wage are far less likely to end up going back to prison. Those in the criminal justice system are not that dissimilar to all of us in that the path to success starts by being surrounded by pro-social coworkers and people. I always told the clients that I supervise, I can predict where you're going to be in the next 5 years based on who you associate with. So one of the things that comes out of employing justice-involved clients is the ability for them to begin interacting with other pro-social people in an environment where they feel like they're accepted. So that alone, again, will increase the odds of them having success and not returning back to the criminal justice system. And I fully understand that not every client is equipped to land a quality job. And I think that's part of the latter question about what the role of nonprofits can be in assisting those folks. But in short, employment is crucial, but we should expect that every job isn't in and of itself the answer to keeping people mired in the criminal justice system. And clients have a role in improving their chances of finding employment by improving their skill sets. So employers need to be fair and equal, and clients need to prove to them that they can be trained to be good workers. So there's a dual responsibility there.
Thank you, Jerry. Dennis, or would anybody else like to pop in on that question? Seeing that, the next question is for you, Dennis. You talked a little bit about this in a broader scale during your introduction, but specifically to Broadlawns. Can you talk about some of the policy changes that Broadlawns made to accommodating hiring returning citizens?
Okay, so this is to piggyback off of what Amber was saying. When we do our background, what we had to do at Broadlawns is we had to get with DHS first, because you can't work in healthcare until you go through the DHS approval process. So what we did is we sit down with DHS and we wanted to know, what are the things that you guys would not accept, So we don't set the people that we try to get in the teacher tech program up for failure. So we didn't want to make them go through a process and then not be able to hire them at the end of that process, or they get a skill that can't be utilized. We thought that would be like putting the cart before the horse. So we figured out the parameters. And like she said, HRs have no clue on how to read a background check. I had to sit in on all the approval processes so that we can translate what actually happened in these events. Sometimes a lot of these agencies, they use the background, the online background checks, and everything pops up. Your juvenile record pops up, your adult record pops up. You get everything that you was charged with. So you got to go into the actual document to figure out what actually happened. And if the person doesn't tell you what happened, a lot of these people, like one of the things that they didn't want to have is domestic abuse. They didn't want to allow people with domestic abuse in their backgrounds. But you got to understand, a lot of people cop out for the domestic abuse so they can get out the next day. So if you don't have a conversation with that individual, you would think that he had done something wrong, but it was an argument.
Mm-hmm.
The police were called, and because in a domestic abuse dispute, somebody has to go to jail once the police get there. So the guy goes to jail, usually the guy goes to jail, and therefore he ends up in jail. Now, somebody comes and says, listen, we'll let you out tomorrow if you cop out to this. He wants to get back to work. So what does he do? He cops out to a domestic. Now this is on his record forever. And nobody really knows what's going on in that situation. So we had to figure out, how do we get this, how do we do this? And the best way for them was for me to sit in on all the approval processes so that we could break it down and see if this was a fit candidate to be in our program. And a lot of things that you would think would keep people out of healthcare didn't keep them out. That violent crime, for instance, didn't keep people out of the healthcare field, because once we have identified during the vetting process, all the other things that that person does, it would outweigh, so he did all his, all his required treatment. He came out, he worked for 6 months or whatever. He volunteered. So once we put the whole package together, he ended up being a fit client. And that's how we got a lot of people in our program.
So it'd be safe to say that that question, that background check is not on the front end of the process, it's more on the back end of the process after you already want to qualify this person to gain employment.
So what we did is we did a double vet. We did a off-campus vet and we did an on-campus interview. So what we did is we went out and recruited people that we thought would be a good fit. And it has more to do with their aptitude. Can they actually go through a college class? Can they do the material? Was their personality suited for healthcare? You got patient contacts all the time. Your CNA is the first line of patient contact, so he's doing all that interaction. He's doing all those personal care. So you had to have that mentality. It does us an injustice to have somebody that wasn't fit to go in and take care of patients to be there. So you had to prove that you had the mentality to work in that field. And a lot of the people, with backgrounds, blew my mind. They could go in and do the pericares. They can go in and clean people up that had, couldn't control their bowel movements or were incontinent. So we really bettered them real hard before we got into the program. So, it served us all well, because the healthcare need was so high that it was important that they got qualified people and that they retained those people once they got them.
Sure. And if I remember correctly, Teach Tech started out through a partnership with Urban Dreams, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we still partner with them.
Still partner with them. So that's one place where a nonprofit has kind of helped to step up to help fill the gap. I want to kind of open this up to the entire table. What are other ways nonprofits can help in the process of finding gainful employment for returning citizens?
You go first.
Yeah.
So I think a main way that nonprofits help is that many of the barriers that people who are returning to our community from incarceration face are the same barriers that anyone living in poverty is facing. And we call these the social determinants of work. So whether that's housing, transportation, childcare, access to food, all of those things, if people don't have stability and don't have access to those things, it's going to be really hard for them to be a good worker for you. So having a partnership with a nonprofit is a way for you to understand and talk to someone who's working with an individual to know how are they doing? Do they have the housing? Or if they are already working for you, things were great, but they all of a sudden stopped coming to work. Well, the nonprofit can go in, it's because their car broke down. So figuring out how to serve those types of things. So that's one big thing that nonprofits can do to help companies. Another big role that I see for nonprofits in our community is really advocacy, because people who are returning have so many barriers, and a lot of times they can think that it's their own barrier. But for nonprofits, we work with many different people, and we can see the same barrier happening over and over and over again. So that's where we can step up and start to let people know about these barriers and really advocate for change in our systems that would benefit the whole community.
Yeah, and I would just say that we are extremely fortunate here in Polk County with the assistance we receive from our nonprofit partners, from job readiness, clothing, transportation. We work with DART a lot, computer literacy, financial literacy, relationship and family reintegration, etc. Whatever success we see with our clients is in large part due to the assistance we receive from our community partners. I think receiving services from those who work outside the criminal justice system is vital. What we don't want is a system where the only place that justice-involved clients can turn to for assistance after their supervision ends is their probation officer At some point, clients are going to discharge from supervision, and we want to get them set up with resources in the community that they can access as their life dictates after they are no longer under community supervision. And again, I would just add that we're very fortunate here in Polk County. The numbers that Cameron talked about in the very beginning, with us supervising approximately 8,500 clients under supervision, roughly 6,600 of those clients are from Polk County. They're citizens of Polk County. So there's roughly 2,000 clients that we supervise outside of Polk County that don't get a lot of the services that our clients here in Polk County receive. So if you're talking about an area of growth that we may be able to improve upon with nonprofits, it's in the rural areas, and I understand the challenges that they face. But again, I'll just close with the fact that any success we have with the clients that we work with are in large part due to the partnerships we have with nonprofits in our community.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, and one of the things, so with Broadlawns, what they did with me, I started out working for Urban Greens. We used Urban Greens as a pathway. So HR is pretty black and white. They got 1,500 employees, so there's no way that they can go in and get into people's personal lives. By getting a nonprofit involved, we were able to go in and get down to the root causes of some of the things that were causing people to lose jobs, to not get jobs, you know. So like she said, we had many clients who we literally had to drive to general assistance so that they can get their water turned back on or their Iowa power turned back on. You know, these are conversations that you can't have on an HR level. And, you know, at Broadlawns, because of the way that our structure is set up, an occurrence is an occurrence. They don't care if your mother died or if, you know, you stayed out all night. You know, you get an occurrence for certain things. And these occurrences accumulate, especially for ex-offenders, when they fall into some kind of situation, like your Iowa power goes out. I mean, so you gotta pick and choose. What am I gonna do? Am I gonna go to work? Am I gonna leave my kids at home with no, you know, water, no electricity? So it was important that we had that element built in, you know, and I use Amber, I partner with all the people I can to make sure that we have access to the resources that are out here that can facilitate any, you know, bump in the road.
Sure. So what I'm hearing from all of you is that one of the roles of nonprofits is really that skill building outside of just the skill of employment, but the skills or to eliminate some of the other barriers that it is to wake up in that morning and get to that job that you've been trying so hard to get to.
Speed up that pivot time.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just telling you, I mean, you guys don't know how retarded your pivot time is when you've got the barrier of ex-offender hanging on your neck. I mean, things just don't happen as fast as we want them to happen. And sometimes, you know, we got POs and we got bills that are pushing us to have a fast pivot time, and it's not realistic. So it's important that you have nonprofits that can direct you to resources if they don't have them. You know, so that's why I think nonprofits are very important. And then you have a lot of times you got to disconnect with folks coming from prison. They've never lived, you know, in certain situations, you know, they never had a career. So it's hard for them to fathom all the things that goes along with careers, because people with careers, your employer has a certain expectation once they put you into that position that is not your norm. You know, if you had entry-level jobs all your life, then quitting McDonald's is easy.
Yeah.
You know, quitting Broadlawns is hard. Yeah.
So, Amber, we were kind of talking about this earlier before the meeting started about, you know, the need for businesses to get involved with second chance hiring now because their need is high. They need employees. Can you talk to me about why it's so crucial for businesses to get involved with second chance hiring, not just because of the pandemic and the high unemployment rate, but to make sure that's a sustainable practice moving forward?
Right. So we're talking about how it's really urgent right now because with the gap of people, there's just not enough people. And we can say that it's because people aren't looking for work, but a lot of times what it is it's our policies that are blocking that out. So the reentry population for me falls into two different buckets. There are people that stop looking for work because they've heard no so many times, they've completely given up and they've changed the gig economy. They, they're doing handyman work, they're cleaning, they're doing all of these things that they can do to survive, but they've dropped out of looking for the straightforward work. The other thing, the other pool then would be people who accepted unemployment where they're really underemployed because they do have pressure from POs to be, working as soon as they can be working. They have bills to pay. They need to take the first job that comes along. And so we have a lot of people in the reentry population that will fall into these entry-level jobs, and a lot of times the lowest paying entry-level jobs. But people that the stigma that's out there is that we have in our mind who this reentry person is, and we have to get rid of that. It's everybody. When I go into the women's prison or to the men's prison, it's just like going into any classroom. There are people with bachelor degrees. There are people with 15 years of construction experience. There was a woman who used to be a nurse. There's someone else who took care of their mother for 15 years. There are so many skills in the room, and all I see are a bunch of people locked up and whose skills aren't being utilized. And so I think we really just have to have a better match of the skills that are there to the employment in our community. When we have this conversation around youth in high schools, there's so many different groups like this where there are groups of people. I think that the prisons are another place where employers can create this pipeline. So even after this pandemic's gone, you can be finding individuals who have the skills you need and preparing them for your positions. Again, setting them up for success instead of just punishing.
Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say, from my perspective, I look at all hiring as creating equal opportunity. I don't care who you are, when you're applying for a job, you want the prospective employer to look at you fairly. We work with our clients on taking ownership over their criminal history and focus on their skills that they can offer to a prospective employer. But obviously, to Amber's point, they have to get that opportunity to do the face-to-face so they can explain who they are. If someone is willing to own their shortcomings, I think the employer should be willing to evaluate them based on their future and not their past. The reality is, this is the best it has ever been for our justice-involved clients seeking employment. There are all kinds of theory, Amber kind of touched on it, for why labor shortages exist. But for our clients, it has worked in their favor, and I'm really excited to see how this positively impacts their lives. And for what it is worth, I know several employers who have always worked closely with our team in providing opportunities for justice-involved clients. And they are what I would call the early evolvers. And I want to say thank you to them. But honestly, we're at 93% employment at our Fort Des Moines Men's Residential Facility. And I was talking to the group beforehand. We have employers now coming in looking for workers that heretofore never came to us looking for employers. And I think that's a positive. And again, I'm really excited to see what our outcomes look like a year from now, knowing that so many more of our clients have been able to find themselves in better employment situations. I think it's going to prove that it was effective in keeping them from being mired in the criminal justice system.
Awesome. Thanks, Jerry. Dennis, you want to take a stab at that question?
Okay, so one of the things that I talked about at the beginning is changing the narrative. If you make it a commercial imperative that people hire ex-offenders, then it changes it from a negative to a positive. And then it doesn't feel like we're jamming these people down their throats. A lot of times what happens is when we get in and we start coming up with these grandiose ideals on how we're going to get people back in the workforce, it's like we're trying to force people to take on, these degenerate people. But in actuality, if you make it a commercial imperative that they hire these people, because it is a benefit. And it's showing now that when the employers really, really need the employees, now it's like, we'll go to the Fort Des Moines to get these. What happens when the COVID relaxes and we're back to normal. Will that need still exist? If we don't change that narrative. If we change that narrative and they know that they can get these people, they're gonna be here, they're gonna retain them for a longer period of time, then I think they'll do it on their own and we won't have to, have these kind of panels to get these guys employed.
Sure.
And we'll get people to relax some of their policies and maybe able to get the legislator to do something as well.
Well, that leads me right into my last preset question. You talk about policies and the legislature. So the question is, what can we do in terms of policies at the state and federal level, but also kind of want to bring in the local level as well. I'm reminded that I believe Waterloo is the first city in the state of Iowa that has banned the box and required employers to do fair chance hiring, which fair chance hiring requires employers not to ask for the background check until a qualified offer is made. So you qualify this person as employable, then you ask for the background check. And then at that point, to Dennis's point, you have the conversation about what charges, what convictions that you saw on the table before moving forward. I do know that the city of Des Moines, the Civil Human Rights Commission, has recommended that passage of a similar ordinance in the city of Des Moines as well, as an enhancement to our human rights ordinance. But talk to me about some policy changes again at the state, federal, or even local level that we can put in place to encourage and incentivize employers to operate with fair hiring practices.
Okay, like I was saying about in the beginning, about doing away with them barriers. I don't care if it's on the state, local, or national level. You have to do away with the barriers. Because if we have a real correctional system, anytime we let people back out on the streets, we're saying that they deserve to be there. We took them through the rigor that they had to do. We already punished them. There's no need to continue that punishment if it's a correction system. Now, if it's not a correction system, then we have to think about how we're going to sentence these people, because it does us no good to come out and have somebody with a scarlet letter on them walking around, trying to be a normal citizen.
Dennis, can you talk a little bit more about what that scarlet letter means? I know what you mean by that, but so there may be some folks in the audience that don't understand.
Okay, so the scarlet letters is when they put that letter to identify, the Jews or whatever back in the day. But it's like, you come out here and you got a big old stamp on everything you do saying that you're ex-offender, you're ex-offender, you're ex-offender. So now when I engage you, and you're an employer and you see ex-offenders, some of the things that happen naturally. It's just natural. You got to be concerned about your brand. You got to be concerned about your product and your clientele. So now you start thinking, how is my clientele gonna take me having ex-offenders? Especially if you doing a cleaning business or something, people are coming into your residence, and you got ex-offender and people have targeted you as saying that he hires ex-offenders. So them are the stigmas that we have to work on doing away with. That's why I talk about making people a protected class, especially in the areas of jobs, housing, and transportation. Doing away with all those laws that take your driver's license away. It does us no good for a guy to get caught with marijuana, and Iowa leads the country in the disparity for marijuana, So you got these guys with marijuana on their records. Now we take their license away. The first time is, 6 months, the second time is a year, so you get in these situations where they start accumulating these driving while bar records. And after a while, that becomes a felony. Now you got a guy, and what happens? Now he's driving. He doesn't have a driver's license. He hits your car. He can't get insurance. So he keeps going. So it's like we compound situations by having laws that don't have nothing to do with the driving record.
Sure. Jerry, as you mentioned, you deal with 85,000 people on a daily basis. What are some of the biggest policy barriers that they're facing upon trying to reenter society?
Yeah, I think my perspective might be a little bit different. As I indicated earlier, I just think it's all about employers being open-minded about employing justice-involved clients. But I also recognize that all hiring is a risk. Every employer is trying to find good workers. They're trying to determine whether or not the person's going to be reliable, dependable, will show up, has some background skills that will be able to help them transition. So again, I just think it's a dual responsibility. The client, the justice-involved client, also has responsibility to be able to prove to that employer why they should be considered for the opportunity and just be given an equal chance. If I were to look at really today what the biggest barriers are, and I know you guys did a policy discussion about this, it's really about housing. And I also think it's about some of the financial liabilities that justice-involved clients are tasked with. Every day that you're at the jail, you're charged $80 overnight stay. It's the pay for stay, story. Your charge carries a fines and fee and court costs. We're talking things separate from restitution, but I think people would be surprised at how buried some of the clients are that come out of the institution with the fines and fees that are, stacked on top of them. So, from a legislative perspective, I think that's one of the areas that I'd like to see the legislature continue to look at to see if that can be somehow adjusted.
Justin, thanks. Amber?
I agree with everything that's been said. And what I'll add is Opportunity Reentry Task Force is a group of community members that comes together and we talk about the issues that we want to advocate for this year. And the three things that rose to the top this year are high set. So high set is the ability to get your high school equivalency, making sure that everybody who's incarcerated is able to get their high set if they do not have a high school degree. While people are incarcerated is the best time to pursue education, whether it's high set or job training or any of those things. There's just not the same, there's not all the noise that's there when they're out in the public. Their kids aren't there. They don't have to worry about transportation. They have plenty of time to study. It's a wonderful time to have people go through education, and it keeps people occupied. It keeps their mind going. It gets them motivated for release. So really promoting more educational opportunities while people are incarcerated. The second thing we're really focusing on this year goes along with the driver's license. A lot of people when they're released don't have a driver's license or ID with them. Like they're able to have one, but for whatever reason it got lost. They don't have access to it, and everything needs an ID. Whether you need food from a food bank, if you want housing, employment, everything needs an ID. So making sure, currently there's a pilot program in Iowa happening in Newton where there's a Department of Transportation staff in the prison, and he helps individuals get their driver's license if they can, or at least a state ID, so that when they're released, that's one barrier taken out of the way. And I think that's a very minimum thing that we can do, but I definitely would want that to be for everybody in the community, not people just being released from Newton. And then the third huge thing that we talk about all the time is mental health. And right now we're using incarceration to treat a lot of our mental health, and treat isn't really to punish people for things that happen because of mental health. And this is an overreaching problem, not just within the reentry community, but really focusing on what mental health and addiction programs are out there. And can we help people treat their actual problem instead of punishing effects that come out of that?
Thank you for that addition.
I was just going to comment on that. The stigma around mental health leads to a lot of that. I think the general public would be surprised to know that less than 5% of the people who are diagnosed with a mental health disorder are involved in any kind of violence. But if you watch the news, anytime there's a mass shooting or something that goes on, the first thing that gets discussed is the person's mental health. And so then the stigma comes around that you should be scared of people because they have a mental health disorder. And it's such a small percent of the people who have a mental health disorder that ever go on to, they're harder on themselves than they are on anybody else. So I think that's part of why we find ourselves incarcerating people that have mental health disorders at a disproportionate rate.
Yeah, indeed. I now want to turn it over to offer up questions from the audience and those online. So if you are online, feel free to throw your questions in the chat and they'll get relayed up to me. But it's also folks taking some pretty copious notes. So I want to open it up to you all for questions to the panel.
How would you compare maybe our criminal justice system to maybe systems in other countries as far as how maybe some things that maybe that they do better than we do, or things that are, you know, that we kind of leave that we maybe do better in the United States than others, especially as it deals with, you know, folks who are on not a you know, people who've been sentenced for long sentences, but trying to, you know, people to rehab up that population or all of that. What do you kind of try to learn from other systems, or think that other systems should learn from us?
Yeah, interestingly, I'm a part of what they call the Urban Chiefs Network, and it's a network that's made up of the largest probation officers or probation office departments in the country. And it's really an anomaly that the 5th district with 8,500 clients is a part of this group. And there's a history, but I'll spare you the history. But so I've been to LA, I've been to Phoenix, I've been to Portland, I've been to New York. And, you know, I would say that I learned a few things from them, but they learn more from us just because of the size. You know, we can be more flexible in some of our things that we're trying to change. You know, I talked in the beginning about evolving and making sure that you're using the data to help make informed decisions. And one of the other unique things that about Iowa, I talked about being the director of the 5th Judicial District. There's 8 judicial districts in the state of Iowa that are all led by a director and a board. And I think that lends itself to local control and local initiatives. And, you know, we're able to pilot things. And if things work in a certain district on a small scale, then those things can be brought out and looked at a larger scale. But, you know, when we look statistically, we're all very similar in terms of recidivism rates. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with structural things that we have no control over. I don't have any control over who lands on supervision. Those things are decided by the court. They're decided by administrative law judges. They're decided by the parole board. So all that we really focus on is how can we do the best job we can at making sure there's no disparity in how we work with clients. And I'm proud to say that, you know, we use what they call the relative rate index to determine whether or not people of color are being violated at a higher rate than white clients, and we don't have disparity. So it's not anything that some of the barriers to reducing our recidivism rates are really not really under our control per se. So when you ask what do other countries do, a lot of it is just legislatively things that they do different, but it isn't, the criminal justice system alone is not capable of making those larger scale changes, I guess, is what I would say. But I'm very proud of what we do in Iowa, and I think we do a really good job.
Yeah, if I could add to that, because Jerry, how I kind of see your role is on the back end, right? Somebody served their time for the most part, right? Now they're into the supervision, trying to reenter society. The problem with the criminal justice system is not so much on the back end, right? It's on the front end. What lands somebody there in the first place, right? Dennis mentioned marijuana. I think just about every state around us, marijuana is legal. But in the state of Iowa, I think the imprisonment rate for marijuana offenses is about 13-1 black to white. So there's where you see the disparities is on the front end. And then some of those barriers on the back end to employment, to housing, to transportation, those are barriers that people in poverty see. They're just going to see it at a higher degree because they also have that conviction or that charge attached to them as well. But legislatively, I think there's some things that we could do on that front end to eliminate some of those initial disparities. So it's a lot easier on the back end for Jerry, the 5th District, right? For Dennis and other nonprofits. You know, they have less people to work with, so they can be more impactful with the ones that they are working.
Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, the United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of those incarcerated in the world. So I agree completely. It's on that front end. We're incarcerating people for many more things here than other countries do. And then the only other thing I would add is any policies that we can start shifting the system away from being all about punishing people and instead about how to reintegrate people and help people act the way we want them to act. Those are the types of policies we need to make. We've just been adding more and more stuff, punishment, punishment, punishment for many, many years. And so I think it's going back to that beginning and figuring out, are we punishing too much and how can we fix that?
Well, what tends to happen is we have the pendulum swings. We go to rehabilitation, then we swings back, and we go to retribution. So right now, we're in that rehabilitative swing, and you guys are noticing it. But I lived through the retribution phase, and I know that exists, and I know it goes back and forth because I was there long enough to see it several times. So that's the thing, that we have to get that consistency that we need to make sure that these policies that we recommend, you know, are being able to be implemented and we're able to do stuff on a consistent basis. One thing that we do know is the recidivism rate is consistent. You know, we know that the unemployment rate for ex-offenders is pretty consistent and it's disproportionate. When you go to certain areas, and that's how our program came about, because we had the 50314 and 50316 area codes had the highest unemployment rate when Iowa was the lowest, had one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country. So, I mean, certain things are systemic, you know, and so we have to consistently work at pounding in or inculcating, you know, those things that do work, so that we don't have to, it's gonna work no matter where that pendulum is at.
I was just gonna kind of build off of what Amber said too, when you talk about over incarcerating and you know, some of the, you know, buildup effect. One of the trends that is disappointing is just the number of females now that are being incarcerated. As you look at our numbers, we have 22% of our clients are now females. When I started 34 years ago, or more, I guess, it was rare that you had very many females under supervision. But today we have 22% of our population is females. And so then you look at the ripple effect of, you know, taking a mother out of the home and the childcare issues and everything else that come along with that. So, you know, systematically, there's a lot of things that are occurring that lead to the numbers that we're talking about here. So those are the things we need to be looking at, changing, evolving.
That was a great question. You got us excited up here, man. Do we have any questions online? No, perfect. Well, that puts us real close to time. So at this time, I'm gonna have Marvin Desir come back up and close us out.
Well, again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you all to our panelists for taking the time and providing your expertise and guidance for those to follow, for employers, fellow nonprofits, and just how to help more individuals get the second chance they deserve to be gainfully employed and get back to living the life that they all desire to have. And thank you all for joining us online and in person today. And again, you can always find the previous public forums we've had and hosted online, and Ryan has dropped that in the chat as well. So thank you all again for joining us, and you all have a great day today.